I want to continue sharing about this really marvelous book by Jeffrey Hopkins called A Truthful Heart, Buddhist Practices for Connecting with Others. And I'm moving along. I think this book could be used for years, but I wanted to try to get through it enough to share some of the insights or some of the precious gems that Jeffrey offers. And as we're moving into equalizing and exchanging self and others, to see the kindness of others, valuing others, Jeffrey is continually bringing us back to strengthening the familiarity of what it feels like in our minds to treasure somebody, to hold someone near and dear like we do our best friends, and to, through the use of our imagination, to go back into past lives, imagining with the strangers in our life and the enemies in our life, that they were friends in our past life as treasured and as cherished as the dearest friends of this life. And that back then and now, irregardless of what their relationship is to us, they were longing to be happy and not suffer as well. So this continuity of this deep human emotion, this deep human longing of or all sentient beings longing, not just humans, of wanting to be happy and not suffer, even though our relationship to them has changed. That back then and now they still have that deep longing. So it's been helping me to keep my heart somewhat open to those that I find difficult with, as far as in relationship to them, either out there in the world or close by, or the multitude of strangers that I come in contact during the course of the week. So he's continually just bringing meditation after meditation in this book. And what I'm beginning to recognize is that I'm becoming more aware of my conceptual mind, and that I have a choice how to use my conceptual mind. Because the meditations in this book are extremely visual. Jeffrey, over and over again, wants us to use our imagination, wants us to use our conceptual mind. And we have a choice. And I see myself during the course of my practice in the morning and at night that I can either use my conceptual mind as an ally to be able to cultivate my warm heart, to be able to cultivate the virtue in my mind, to be able to change my relationship on how I perceive people, or I can have my conceptual mind be used as a foe, which is the self-centered thought, just takes it, hooks it, and I'm off and running with all sorts of disturbing thoughts, all sorts of proliferating, all sorts of unkind things, and it doesn't serve me. So I'm beginning to appreciate the power of the conceptual mind and how it can either serve virtue or it can serve non-virtue. And this entire book is around using our conceptual mind for virtue. So today I wanted to just share with you two of the meditations that Jeffrey has in here that I've been working on this week. And they're just so wonderful. Because I have an extremely very dramatic imagination. I'm a drama queen on the outside and I'm a drama queen on the inside. And using these meditations has let me give my conceptual mind carte blanche to just really enjoy itself in a virtuous way. So the first one is, he says, this is His Holiness's favorite meditation, and it promotes taking responsibility oneself for the well-being of others, and is based on Shantideva's Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life. So this is the way it's kind of set up. It says, first of all, imagine three people, three beings in your mind. In the center is your wise and kind and compassionate self. On one side is your whiny, groveling, complaining, greedy self. And what you can do with your imagination is, what does she or he look like? How does she sound? What's the body language? What's the story? And on the other side is a group of 5 or 4 people who represent the countless impoverished, destitute, poor, frightened, trapped, oppressed beings in our world. And so then the question becomes, with the wise one standing in the middle there, which one am I going to help? Now, it's obvious, right? But there's a way in which you have to be willing to park yourself as that being in the middle there and look at that whiny, groveling self who all day long just thinks I, is so consumed with its own self-concern and welfare that it's not even tracking the concern of others. And on the other side, and I keep thinking of the refugees. I keep thinking of that little boy in the back of that medical truck in Aleppo, all covered in blood, that little boy who drowned on the Aegean Sea, the millions of refugees. I mean, I can conjure up the pictures that we've had for the past 2 years as those beings, all those individual eyes over here. And which one shall I help? And it's not like you dismiss and throw yourself to the lions, but it's all about bringing the care and the concern that we have for ourselves over and over again to be able to transfer that, to share it with this limitless amount of beings and to perceive them in their most suffering state. And His Holiness says this will jar you if you picture it in your mind the way that it needs to be pictured. And he said, and it will also cultivate this very clear conclusion that says, of course, I'm going to care for all those other eyes because they are just as worthy of happiness. They are just as worthy of being free from all of this horrible harm and destitution. And to really set up in the mind the whole scenario. And you can find out in your heart, there's this tenderness, there's this open-heartedness, there's this heartbreak that comes up. It doesn't throw you into personal distress because you're the one in the middle that's wise and kind and strong and compassionate. So it's not like you throw yourself into personal distress, but you can really see that this is not a science here. This is very obvious on how the mind has to adjust and adapt itself to the welfare of others. And what Jeffrey says is that each day he says, think of these other eyes, I, apostrophe S, and make whatever effort, big or small, to help someone around you. We may not have a lot of resources, we may not have a lot of time, but if our motivation is clear to be kind and help others on a day-to-day basis, he says you will be surprised how this will untie a lot of problems, internally and externally. Then the second meditation that I want to share, we have this visualization somewhat in a lot of our sadhana practices, but he kind of puts a particular kind of spin on it that I have found really quite lovely. He has this lovely meditation where you imagine helping others by visualize sending them this beautiful radiant light and nectar that just saturates. He uses saturates, he uses permeates their body and mind to the extent that it penetrates into their bones, into their flesh, into their organs, into their mind, everything. And it clears away all their problems and restores a sense of balance. He says, imagine this 5-colored rainbow light. He says, start with one person. You can start with your friend. You can work your way into your different level of friends. You can then go on to stranger. You can go on to friend. He says, you can do this for a huge number of people all at the same time. And he says, imagine that the light and nectar puts the person totally at ease. And this is the part that's I found quite helpful, is that you put them in such a state of ease and balance that they can reflect on the fact that all beings want happiness and don't want suffering. And you see this person able to develop the ability to feel close to others as well, just as you are beginning to feel that. So you're doing a little bit like you're giving them all the light, you're giving them all the nectar, but then you're also imagining them having this beautiful wisdom and capacity to be able to see, just like me, all beings want to be happy and not suffer. He says you can do this with animals, you can build it up to as many beings as you can imagine. And he says it helps us to reconnect to a sense of cherishing others. This is where, and once again, I've been doing these meditations, even for 10 or 15 minutes in the morning, and to know how hard it is not to disconnect from this open, truthful heart that wants to benefit others. It's really hard to sustain this. There's such a default to go back into one's self-concern and one's self-interest. But, I can see that I can somewhat maintain it, at least during the course of my meditation session, and sometimes during the course of the day. If I'm looking at the news or I'm looking at someone struggling in the community, I take a moment to try to use one of these meditations. And he quotes that beautiful verse that we have in the Garden is Precious Garland right now, because this whole idea about cherishing and valuing and offering oneself to others is the one that we've been doing just this past Thursday. Or was it maybe even last Thursday or this Thursday? I can't remember. May I always be an object of enjoyment for all sentient beings according to their wish, and without interference, as are the earth, the water, the wind, herbs, and the wild forests. To really imagine oneself as an object of great enjoyment to all beings whose deep wish to be happy and not suffer. They will come to you without any obstacles, utilize you as an object in which they can attain these things, just like the wilderness and all these freely unowned things in the world. And so I think I'm just beginning to get a sense of the power of familiarity and the power of my own conceptual mind, that becoming familiar with the sense of closeness, first to my friends, to my community, to my teacher, then to neutral people, and then to enemies, using our imagination to conjure up these scenes, conjure up these visualizations, which are powerful enough, if done enough, to transform our minds into minds of kindness and care. So what I can imagine is, by doing these meditations through the course of one's life, and then having enough imprints, enough sort of propensity into the next life, I can even see in the past month that bodhicitta doesn't seem to be so far away. Taking these little moments and this 10 minutes a day and 15 minutes a day and trying to find this equanimity, this equal caring concern, and this wish to be happy and not suffer, and imagining myself, imagining others, my best friend, and moving everybody around, and then to extend it out into my future lives. I really am starting to see the power of these meditations on how sometime in the future they could become a lot of the causes and conditions for having spontaneous bodhicitta. Like I used to see these meditations as somewhat sentimental, as somewhat kind of magical thinking. But because I've been doing this pretty consistently for the past few weeks, I can see the softening, that even though I'm still upset with what's going on in the world, I can turn my mind in my practice to warm it, to soften it, and to bring a sense of closeness, even for a little bit during the course of the day. And to my friends, I can see not a sentimentality or an attachment, but to see the closeness and the dearness, and to then throw my mind back to the past and to see that strangers and enemies have been just like my community, just like my sister, just like my dear friends. There's definitely a strengthening and a capacity to hold that a little bit longer. And so that's what I'm really, and it's not magical thinking, it's extremely profound, it's very, very difficult. The self-centered thought gets totally pissed off when I go to this practice, but I can just dispense with it, even for 15 minutes. And so I can see how this can become the great causes for an awakening mind sometime in the future. I'm really building up my confidence on how these meditations are a great way to use the conceptual mind as an ally for virtue, without a doubt, for the benefit of all beings.